What's up, everybody? Here with another video, and today I'm going to talk about the best horror franchises of all time. Let's get started. Alright, so I wrote down every franchise I could think of from the entirety of horror. And what a franchise is any series that has 3 or more movies. I'm not counting sequels like a 1 and 2 punch, like Grave Encounters 1 and 2, or things like that. That's not a franchise. It has to be at least 3 movies to be considered a franchise. So I wrote down everyone I could think of, and I'll tell you, narrowing it down to a top, there was 12 that I came up with that were a top. I was gonna do a top 10, but I could not mention some just because they're just too important to horror not to mention. So let's get started. Coming in at number 12, the Halloween franchise. I almost didn't put this on the list because if you think of the span of the 13 movies, what I'm looking for in a franchise is it consistent? Does it make sense? Does 1 go into 2, 2 into 3, so on and so forth? Absolutely not. Not with this franchise. The timeline is so convoluted. And then on top of that, there are some really, really good movies in the franchise. And there are some not so good movies in the franchise. Now, you have to give Halloween credit for spanning 44 years. That isn't a feat. So 44 years worth of horror fans have been exposed to this series. And when it's at its best, it's the best. Like I said before, like I said in my last video, Halloween, the original, is the best slash movie ever made. I will not argue. I mean, I'll argue that with anybody till the end of time. But the franchise is not very good as a whole when you look at it movie by movie. I loved Halloween 1 and 2. I loved Halloween 4. Resurrection, Halloween 2, the Rob Zombie one, not so much. And then you get to this most recent trilogy. I love 2018. I enjoyed Kills because it was like Michael Myers' showcase essentially. And then we get to Ends. And my reviews on Ends before, if I was to do another review on Ends today, that movie alone is why this ranking is where it is. You ended it's supposed to be the end of the entire thing on this note here. And it was horrid because here's the thing. In all these other franchises, the main villain still is made to shine. Even in their worst iterations, they're still the focus of the movie. To have Michael Myers not the focus, and 2, just be taken advantage of like he was some helpless, the portrayal of Michael Myers was one of the biggest horror movie sins I have seen in a franchise this long standing. So for that reason, that's my number 12. And the only reason it's even on the list because of what it means to the horror genre. The horror genre is what it is today because of the success of previous or with some movies of this franchise. So it deserves mentioning, and because the ones that I really love are some of my favorite horror movies and the original one is my favorite, I can't not mention it, but I was very close to leaving it off completely. Number 12, Halloween. At number 11, I'm going to go with Nightmare on Elm Street. Now, I enjoy the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise, and the reason why it edges out Halloween is because regardless of how Freddy's been portrayed, Freddy has still been the main focus. And there have been some very, very good movies in this series. Off the top of my head, the original, Part 3, New Nightmare. Now, I'll say this. I enjoyed the remake. And I will stand by anybody and will tell them I enjoyed the remake. Now, I understand the remake is very divisive. Most people didn't like it. Number one, because there was no Robert Englund. Now, I understand that, and I get that from my perspective. No disrespect to Robert Englund. I absolutely love Robert Englund. There is no one person bigger than horror. And although Robert Englund made Freddy Krueger iconic, Freddy Krueger he now belongs to the horror world, right? He doesn't belong to Robert Englund. He belongs to the horror world based off the work Robert Englund did to make him as big as he is. Anybody should be allowed to get an opportunity to play Freddy Krueger. And I really thought that Jackie Earle Haley did a great job. But I think no matter what he did, he was already at a disadvantage because we love Robert Englund so much. But the reason why I rank the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise at 11, the ones that have been bad are very, very bad. Freddy's Dead, not just in the franchise, but it's a really bad horror movie. It's lifeless to me. Freddy Krueger is kind of like a shell of what he once was. That's my personal opinion. Dream Child was kind of on the downward slope, and then Freddy's Dead kind of came and just took that out. Now, New Nightmare brought it back. Why I had to mention Nightmare on Elm Street is because of all the horror characters in the history of horror movies, Freddy Krueger has the same the same effect on horror in the way Dracula did. And at Freddy Krueger's peak, at Robert Englund's peak, there were TV shows. He was in rap videos, video games. Like, there was so much that the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise brought to horror. Now, the last iteration of this series was 2009, and there's not any talk about it coming back. There's been some stuff on YouTube, like some fan films, but I'm not counting that for the purposes of the ranking. It's only going to be mainstream movies. So that's my number 11. Number 10, Friday the 13th franchise. Now, of all of the big three, Michael Myers, Freddy, and Jason has been the most consistently respected. And I would say throughout. Now, granted, you have some stuff like Jason Goes to Hell or Jason X. For me, Jason X was a great representation of Jason. It was just different. It was a different setting. Taking him to space, that can always be divisive, but it was a great representation of Jason. He was brutal, and he was unforgiving, and it's one of my favorite versions of Jason Voorhees personally. But from start, well, I don't want to say from start, because the very first one, he wasn't in that movie. It was his mother. So from the second one on, it's very consistent. It's a very consistent movie. Where it kind of loses itself for me is some of the quirkiness. The one movie with the girl had this telekinesis that was a little silly, and of course, some of the movies here were silly. Jason Goes to Hell, turning Jason into this little worm thing that was just kind of like infecting people. I understand, but it did take away from the essence of Jason. But even still, when Jason was in a body, you still had the same brutality, and it was still centered around Jason Voorhees. I just personally like some other franchises more than this one. So coming in number 10 for me, Friday the 13th franchise. At number 9, I'm gonna go with the Scream franchise. So you guys have seen some of my reviews. Part 1, Part 2, Part 4, Part 5, I liked. Part 3, this most recent one, it just didn't do it for me. Now, why I put it above what I've already mentioned, the actual villain has been on an uptick. Now, the movies themselves might not be, but the actual presentation of Ghostface and making Ghostface a legitimately scary character to fear, to me, has improved as movies have gone along. And with another one on the horizon next year, there's no telling when this will lose its footing, and it has made Ghostface still look not relevant, but still being consistent from 1 to 6 where we are now. So that's my number 9, the Scream franchise. At number 8, I'm going with the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise. Now listen, this franchise has lasted for 48 years. That is longer than Halloween, which is 44 years. That's longer than anything that I previously mentioned. For that reason, and the fact that it hasn't really lost itself throughout all the iterations and all the different generations it's passed through. 48 years is a long time for a horror franchise to remain relevant. And in 2022, this most recent version was very good. And Leatherface has always been presented as a badass that you should fear. So coming in number 8, Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise. At number 7, I'm going to go with The Conjuring. Now, some people look at The Conjuring franchise as and they group in Annabelle and The Nun as part of that franchise. I'm not doing that. I'm mainly going off The Conjuring. Conjuring 1, Conjuring 2, Conjuring 3. But it is worth mentioning the effect that The Conjuring's had as a whole on horror by being able to branch off the way it's done. So part 3 to me was the worst of the 3. But part 1 and part 2 were absolutely amazing. And because they were able to introduce other characters within the movie. Not talking about those movies, but just within the movie. Even the Crooked Man was terrifying. Annabelle was terrifying. The Nun was terrifying. So it all came from Conjuring. Again, I'm not speaking about the movies, just the characters themselves. Very rarely do you have a movie that is focused on one thing, make an icon, and make individual characters kind of take precedence to stand right or wrong alongside the movies, versus just having the movies be great. Now, taking them out altogether, some of the best jump scares and the most legitimate jump scares that I have felt in horror as of recent horror has come with these movies. Insidious is another one that's really good too. I personally like the Conjuring franchise better. I think the Conjuring franchise is a little bit more a little scarier to me. So that's why I have that as my number 7, the Conjuring franchise. Number 6, we're getting closer to the end now, guys. So number 6, we've got The Purge. Okay, The Purge is very good because it can actually happen. Again, from part 1 to the most recent, very, very consistent. And the theme within The Purge is absolutely terrifying. Now, since it's got a lot more working for it than it does than some of these other franchises do, because each franchise this franchise does not need to keep a central villain strong. The theme is in and of itself is the villain. So the theme being for 12 hours, all crime is legal. That theme being as long as that stays intact, then everything else can fall into place with it, because it's not an actual specific creature or specific villain that you can water down. As long as that theme is there, this can go on forever. So for me, number 6 is the Purge franchise. All right, here we are on the top 5. This one might surprise some of you guys. Number 5 for me, 5th best franchise of all time, is the Living Dead franchise. I know, a little surprising, huh? Think about it though. Think about it. Night of the Living Dead, classic. Dawn of the Dead, classic. Day of the Dead, classic. The remake to the Dawn of the Dead, classic. That's just 4 movies in the franchise, all classics. Now, it's one thing to make a franchise and each movie be good within the franchise, but to just be able to mention each one individually as classics by themselves is huge. So, and then for one of my favorite horror movies that a lot of people don't really talk about is Diary of the Dead. It was a first-person filmed of the Dead franchise. Land of the Dead, also very good. Now, not every single movie in the franchise has been good. Day of the Dead, Contagion, I wasn't a big fan of that one. But for the most part, every single one of them have been strong and been consistent. And this franchise had lasted for 41 years, debuting in 1968 with the original Night of the Living Dead. So to even talk more on Night of the Living Dead, that one movie stands alone as one of the greatest pieces of horror cinema ever. And even the remake with Tony Todd also garners acclaim across all of horror. So for number 5 for me, because I liked Dawn of the Dead. I like the remake more than the original, and I love the original. That's just saying how strong this franchise is for me. So number 5, the Living Dead franchise. Number 4, going with more consistency and also coming to a little bit more recent, Paranormal Activity. Now, say what you will. For me, every single time Paranormal Activity movie was coming out, I was there first day. And although the first one absolutely terrified me to my core, to the part where I felt like I was desensitized going forward, the second one, the third one I still think is the scariest one of the franchise. I had just been so deeply affected by the first that the third one didn't affect me the same, but the scares, the pacing, and the actual movie, I think, was a scarier movie overall than the first one. Even Ghost Dimension was really good. Next of Kin, the very last one, it had its moments. It definitely was not as good as any other movie in this franchise. But before that one, every single one of them stayed true to themselves, stayed consistent, and for me, stayed terrifying throughout. So for me, that's my number 4, the Paranormal Activity franchise. All right, number 3, I'm gonna go with Hellraiser. You guys just heard me talk about Hellraiser being one of my top 10, or one of my 10 favorite horror movies. The franchise has, if you talk to 200 horror fans, you're gonna get a different opinion on the whole series as a whole. For me, 2 is very serviceable sequel. 3 is one of the best versions, if not the best leading up to that point, of Pinhead. So if you take the character Pinhead, part 3 is his best iteration. 4 goes back and shows you the history of the actual box. Why we're here in the first place? Because they open up a box in part 1. So part 4 shows that, this is about the box. Number 5, and between 5 Inferno, Deader, Hellseeker, Hellseeker, they all kind of go a different route, but it still works. In this iteration, Pinhead and the Cenobites are more of like morality judges in a sense, where these people will open the box or seek the box out, and then their entire world, they're just tormented the whole way through. But then you find out what they did to elicit this kind of reaction. And I think it still stays true to Hellraiser, because Hellraiser, regardless of what we may feel, is not about Pinhead. It isn't. Even in the very first movie, he was lead Cenobite. So the villain of the movie, of the actual series, is the box. The box is the villain. Once the box comes into play and is open, then it opens a world that they delve into. But the actual villain itself is the box. There was one iteration of this, and it was Hellraiser Revelations. Horrible, I think. Absolutely horrible by my estimation. Every other one of these movies I enjoyed thoroughly. And the most recent one, Hellraiser Judgment, I've talked to a lot of people that don't like it. I don't understand it. I absolutely love it. I think it's one of the best of the franchise. And if you have not seen my ranking on the Hellraiser series, go check that out. I'll leave a link in the comment or in the description below, a link to that one. But yeah, this is one of my favorites, and to me, the third best franchise from start to finish of all time. Coming in number 2, the Saw franchise. Now listen, say what you will about the franchise. I looked forward to every single Halloween when they were coming out, every single year. And what you look forward to, so originally, of course, Saw took everyone by surprise when it first came out. And then the second one came out, which was, a lot of people thought the second one was better than the first. Then the third one came out, and I personally think that's the best one of the series. By that point, I'm invested in John Kramer. I'm invested in the traps. And one of the things that goes underrated with Saw is the music. When that last part of the music starts to hit towards the end, as everything starts to unfold, that's what I found myself looking for for the remainder of the series. And I just love the way that the whole movie builds up to the end, and the end is just so intense, so engaging. Now, a lot of people do not like the fact that it got progressively bloody as it goes on. I understand that. To me, it's kind of par for the course, and I could overlook that because I'm already into the characters and what's happening. So I personally didn't care about it. It didn't really bother me. And by comparison of some of these movies that we've seen, guys, it's not that bloody. The series is not that bloody. If you look at from the all of horror and some of the stuff that we've watched, it's not that bad. So that and the consistency, with the exception of, I wasn't a huge fan of Spiral, but I liked Jigsaw, and I liked every movie before it. And I love how every loose end was tied up. Like the callbacks and the way that they were able to link the events of 5 to the events of 1 or to the events of 2, to where it might seem convoluted, but if you follow, because one of my favorite things to do is to watch the entire series at least once a year, and if you follow each movie, they don't leave any stone unturned. They really don't. I can't think of too many horror franchises that have that much attention to detail in each one of their movies, to where nothing gets left behind. For me, Saw is my second favorite franchise of all time. So you're probably wondering what could be 1. I mean, I've already mentioned Saw. I've already mentioned, Halloween, Nightmare on Elm Street. What could be number 1? To me, there's no competition. It's the Child's Play franchise. Now, one can say, well, what about Bride, and what about Seed? Sure, yes, you can take those two and say that they weren't that good. But like Freddy Krueger, Chucky had become a household name that was violent / funny. So they kind of played into that and leaned into that. Now, after this happens, Curse of Chucky was the next one to come out, which completely shifted back to what the franchise is. About a killer doll that you should not cuddle with, that is very intimidating, very scary. And I think Curse, right behind the second one, is the best of the franchise. I put the first one as the third best. I think it's 2, and then Curse, and then the original one. Now, after that, then you had Cult, which keeps Chucky at the forefront, but also adds another layer to the franchise. And how much do we see in a long-standing franchise? How much do we see a completely new layer added on that still makes sense with the original? Now, they try to do that with Halloween Ends, but that didn't make sense to the original. Do you see what I'm saying? This one kept Chucky, which is what the movie's about, at the forefront. And I know that there was a little bit of that issue between the owners of Child's Play and the owner of Chucky. So then you had the Child's Play remake. Even that was good. I understand that people get attached to Brad Dourif, and Brad Dourif is iconic, but the and I know he wasn't the voice for the Child's Play remake, but it was still a very good movie. If you can get past that, I think they did a better version in that movie of showing the relationship between Andy and Chucky and making it seem more of this codependent relationship, personally. Now, then you fast forward to the TV show. To this day, it's still going. Its third season coming out in October. So this has been going in total for 35 years. The movies for 31, and everything with the franchise for 35 years, and it seems there's no slowing down. And just I think Chucky's stock has risen since the original, whereas other villains' stocks have fallen as the series have gone on. I don't think the same can be said for Chucky and the franchise. So for me, Child's Play franchise, the Chucky franchise, however you want to word it, that is the best franchise of all time to me. And that's my list, guys. I want to know. I feel like I've kind of got thrown some people for a loop with this one, because it's a very divisive subject. We get attached to our horror movies, and we get even more attached to our franchises. So what I want to know is, what did you guys think? Did you agree with my list? Did you disagree with my list? What is your ranking? What are your favorite, and what do you think are the best horror franchises? Let me know in the comments. I'll see you guys next time.